Hi guys, it is a beautiful cold winter day here in the end times in the paradise of East Bumblefuck, New Mexico, here on this Thursday, January 2017. And just a quick warning, this rant will include many references to the T word. So I just, earlier today I did a short rant on how Donald Trump, in his first week in office, among his other achievements, has managed to get the doomsday clock pushed closer towards midnight, single-handedly within his first week. Donald Trump getting the honor of pushing the doomsday clock forward. We're now 2.5 minutes to the apocalypse. Thanks very much to Donald. But although it was not specifically mentioned in any of these stories that I shared, you better damn well believe that part of the reason has to do with the South China Sea. And I cannot think of a better time to bring my long overdue rant about why I believe that World War III, if we see a World War III, and we will eventually, look for it coming out of the South China Sea. And I see no reason not to back off from this doomsday prediction. But before I dive into what Donald Trump has to do with bringing us into World War III, possibly a nuclear holocaust with China, after all he did to keep Hillary Clinton from getting us in a nuclear war with Russia, now he has just decided to do it with China. But before we get into that, I'm just going to go back to this book from 5 years ago, The Race for What's Left, The Global Scramble for the World's Last Resources by journalist Michael Clare. And just real quickly, what this is about, if you're unfamiliar with this is China, just this unadulterated horseshit contention that it owns pretty much all of the South China and the East China Sea. This has already been, this notion has been laughed off by at least one world court. It's an absolutely preposterous opinion. And I mean, they're going out hundreds and hundreds of miles all over these international waters, which clearly belong to the Philippines and Malaysia, and who else is on this map? Malaysia, the Philippines, Brunei, of course, Vietnam. Anyway, China making all these claims, and as Gerald Celente would probably say, they're not doing this because they're raising broccoli out there. This is all about oil. It is about resource. It's not all about oil. It's mostly about oil, and it's also the fact that about $5 trillion worth of goods are moved back and forth across these waters. That China, all of these goddamn container ships going in and out of China from all over the planet are coming across this water. Do the math. And underneath the water, more importantly than what's in the boats on top of the water, is there's some suggestion somewhere, estimates up to 130 billion barrels of oil at the bottom of the ocean. And there's also a few fish that they're interested in. But anyway, I was wondering why Michael Clare was not talking about the South China Sea. in his book, The Race for What's Left. I was thinking, well, the reason why is because he was building up to it. This entire book was building up. So I'm just going to read this. And then we're simply, after I read this from 2012, I'm simply going to read a few headlines from this week's news. But let's go back 5 years for some backstory. Okay. As countries become more reliant on the same handful of contested supply zones, meaning natural resource supply zones, in this case oil, it is increasingly likely that some encounter will in fact trigger a clash between two major powers. I would say a hell of a lot more than two in this case, especially since political leaders are very reluctant to back down in a struggle over what are seen as vital national interest. Probably no area of the world is more likely to be the site of such a confrontation than the East and South China Seas, which are believed to sit atop significant oil and natural gas deposits. China maintains that both seas lie mostly within its territorial waters, but a large swath of the East China Sea is also claimed by Japan, while significant portions of the South China Sea are claimed by Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. Development of these offshore oil and gas fields could provide these nations with a valuable source of energy, but it cannot go ahead without some agreement on the location of maritime boundaries, and the disputes have become deeply contentious. Remember, this was written 5 years ago. All of the countries involved have deployed air and naval forces in the contested areas and on occasion have engaged in provocative behavior such as seizing fishing boats or aiming guns at one another's ships and planes. The United States, which 5 years ago maintained security ties with a number of the local players, has also deployed its military forces in the region. Should such activity continue as it has and ramped up probably tenfold over the past 5 years, it is not hard to imagine how some minor incident, say a collision between two warships, accidental or otherwise, could escalate into a major crisis. Indeed, several recent events suggest just how easily such a scenario might unfold. And then he goes down the list of all this shit that was going on years ago. So moving ahead to the end of that list, because we have our whole new list, many observers worry about a pattern of growing Chinese aggressiveness in the area. Certainly, Chinese authorities have displayed no inclination to compromise regarding their unadulterated horseshit claims to the East and South China Seas. Let's see, and to lend weight to that assertion, the Chinese Navy has conducted extensive military maneuvers in the South China Seas, deploying a fleet of missile-carrying warships and conducting live-fire exercises. Now, the main development since this book was written, this ongoing development, is that China is actually out there building in the middle of the ocean, hundreds and hundreds of miles from China. They're building these artificial islands which are being used as set up as military bases. There's no argument. They're not even denying it, I don't think, anymore. What they're doing out there is that they are literally creating islands in the middle to arm the area. Chinese belligerents has led to increased hostility from other countries with their own vital interests in the area. Then they go down that list. The United States, this is under Obama, has also cautioned China against excessive provocation, insisting that it is fully prepared to defend its allies in the region. In late 2011, Obama announced the establishment of a new U.S. base at Darwin in Australia's north coast. There is no way to predict when or if such aggressive posturing will lead to something much more serious. It is perfectly evident, however, that all key parties to the territorial disputes in the East and South China Seas are prepared to employ military means in asserting their claims to valuable offshore resource deposits and to risk armed encounters with their rival claimants. And while it can be assumed, at least 5 years ago, that none of these countries specifically intends to provoke a violent clash, neither are they prepared to exercise restraint. If, in some future confrontation, maybe looking ahead from 2012, commanders on the scene do not refrain from using live ammunition, and senior government officials then fail to order an immediate ceasefire, a larger outbreak of violence could conceivably follow. Many wars have erupted that way in the past, and there is no reason to assume the same cannot occur again. Well, the question is not can it, the question is will it? And I would actually take it a step farther. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this powder keg is going to blow in the South China Sea. And if there is anybody, if there is one person on this planet who will blow the powder keg, it is the same man who has single-handedly pushed the doomsday clock closer to Armageddon in his first week in the office. And so, guys, I'm just going to. This is just a few of the stories when I went in to this week's news and did a search on the South China Sea. This was actually a kind of soft-pedaled article from a couple of days ago in the Washington Post. Is Trump ready for war in the South China Sea, or is his team just not being clear? So the Washington Post is not quite ready to weigh in on answering that question at this point, but the French news service doesn't seem to have a problem with it. China must expand its nuclear arsenal in response to Trump. China must strengthen its nuclear arsenal to force the U.S. to respect it in response to the stance of new U.S. President Donald Trump. This is the comments in the Global Times, a popular paper known for its inflammatory rhetoric and hawkish views. So I don't think this is the article they're talking about. This is an article, when I was trying to find that one, I came up with this analysis from globalresearch.org. Trump threats on South China Sea heighten risk of nuclear war. Just days after taking office, the Trump administration has set course for a conflict with China over the South China Sea that threatens military clashes and war. President Donald Trump's press secretary, Sean Spicer, on Tuesday, 2 days ago, backed up an earlier assertion by the administrator's nominee for Secretary of State, former ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson, that Washington would bar Chinese access to islets being built up by Beijing in the South China Sea. And so expanding on those comments from that oil man, Rex Tillerson, Spicer bluntly declared, quote, "The U.S. is going to make sure that we protect our interests there." And of course, our interests are Rex Tillerson's interests, which are ExxonMobil's interests. That this is called a building oil war. Is anybody failing to understand what this is? At his congressional hearing, Tillerson lashed out at China, declaring that its land reclamation activities in South China were, quote, akin to Russia's taking Crimea. He warned that China's island building would have to stop, adding that its, quote, access to those islands also is not going to be allowed, close quote. So the Trump administration is directly challenging China's unadulterated horseshit control over these islets. Yes, as various analysts have pointed out, the only means of barring China would be a naval and air blockade in the South China Sea. Such action, which would be a clear breach of international law, would constitute an act of war. Okay, this is the International Business Times. U.S. vows to protect its interest and foil Beijing's plan to take over South China Sea islands. The White House has warned that it would take measures to thwart Beijing's efforts to take over the disputed islands in the South China Sea. The comments from the new administration come amid the Chinese state media's warnings that such action by the Trump White House would require Washington to, quote, wage war. And here we go from, what is this website? I don't even know what this one is. China just issued a nuclear warning to Donald Trump in the United States. Following comments made by White House spokesman Sean Spicer, in which he said the United States would absolutely protect its interests in the South China Sea, the Asian superpower has fired back through its state-run media, going so far as to suggest China should beef up its nuclear arsenal in the face of Donald Trump's presidency. Yep. Okay. Let's jump over to the French news service again. Remember this guys, and these are just how they came off the Rolex, as it were. I could go on and on with this, and you better believe that none of this. I have been watching the PBS NewsHour every night for the past week. So even PBS which is as close as we're going to have to alternative news. You have never heard the word South China Sea uttered, as far as I know, yet during the Trump administration. Okay. U.S. faces stiff China pushback in South China Sea, according to experts. According to the French news service, if Donald Trump's hawkish new administration follows through on its threats and tries to cut Beijing off from artificial islands it has built in the South China Sea, it could face a stiffer pushback than many imagine, experts say. The U.S. president and his team have made much of their desire to put Beijing in its place, including in the strategically vital waterway which China claims almost entirely, and where it has reclaimed and fortified thousands of acres of land. Observers have quickly pointed out that any full-scale blockade this would require was likely to provoke a military response from Beijing, a response that might be enough to make the U.S. think twice. Donald Trump is not a man to think twice. He is an arrogant, egotistical, homicidal, psychopathic, probably insane maniac with the emotional maturity of a schoolyard bully. Anybody who thinks that this little pissing match here in the first week of the Donald Trump presidency could not erupt into a nuclear confrontation and World War III, pull your head out of your ass. Here we have this story. I've got 4 more here. China officially orders its citizens to prepare for World War III. And this was, this was the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled that the People's Republic of China's claims in the South China Sea and its land reclamation activities are invalid and unlawful. And so what was the response from China? The Chinese Defense Minister Chang Wanquan has urged his country's citizens to prepare for what he described as the People's War at Sea. So there you go. So China's citizens have officially been told to prepare for World War III. Okay, 3 more, then I think you'll get the point. From Foreign Policy magazine, I am a new big fan. How is Foreign Policy magazine weighing in on this? China won't run from a fight with Trump. Watching warily as Donald Trump takes office, China's leaders are contemplating the prospect of a more assertive U.S. president willing to upend decades of U.S.-Sino relations. Trump's Asia policy represents the first major reshaping of U.S. policy towards China since 1979, and from Beijing's perspective, it is currently on a worst-case trajectory heading toward a trade war and a military standoff. And this is a long, involved story. Where does it actually talk about the South China? This breaks it all down. all the various things. Then they talk about Rex Tillerson making these comments about these islands directly challenging Beijing's claims in the South China Sea, indicated that the new administration would consider denying China access. The slow boil of the past several years over China's expansion in Pacific waters may heat up rapidly. Backing down in the face of these American threats would only open Beijing up to pressure from other nations. Hence, the alarming warnings of a potential devastating confrontation. The toxic combination of Chinese fear and confidence makes some kind of miscalculation or accident more likely. As he was talking, as Michael Clare was talking about, given China's New Year's vow to protect the country's maritime rights and interest, the latest in a raft of similar rhetoric, it will be difficult to contain the aftermath of any new accident. Yes, equally, China may increase its maritime intimidation of smaller nations in the South China Sea, daring the United States to uphold its promises of freedom of navigation. We are gone. We got two more. This is from the Inquisitor. World War III news. Yes. Several reports leading into the new year have shown China becoming more militarily assertive in the Pacific, not to mention a bit more confrontational toward the United States regarding diplomatic, economic, and military relations. All calls for some to fear the advent of a possible nuclear confrontation and or World War III. Yep. The Daily Express reported last week that China has sent a war fleet into the South China Sea, although the official China stance is that its warships are all part of routine military exercises. Experts eyed the naval maneuvers where an aircraft carrier and 5 other Chinese naval vessels, as a move by China to assert its dominance in the South China Sea. Beijing already claims much of the territory, an important area where international shipping lanes see over $5 trillion in trade each year. This is a statement from China's state-run newspaper, the Global Times. Quote, "The Chinese fleet will cruise to the eastern Pacific sooner or later. When China's aircraft carrier fleet appears in offshore areas of the U.S. one day, it will trigger intense thinking about maritime rules." That is a direct quote from the Chinese state news agency. Anyway, and we're going to close with this. No shit, Sherlock. China to continue drills in South China Sea. State-run media says China will continue to carry out military exercises in the South China Sea despite, quote, meddling and disruption by foreign countries. the state-run People's Daily newspaper said, quoting the People's Daily, quote, "These provocations, pressures, fantasies, and over-exaggerations," from Donald Trump is what they're talking about, "will not prevent the normal drills of the Chinese military. The meddling and disruption of countries from outside the region," meaning the United States, "can only run counter to the consensus of common interests that accords with this region and the world. Henceforth, the Chinese military's exercise far out at sea will become a kind of normal, extremely normal drill." An extremely normal drill. Guys, I could go on and on, but I think you get the point. One more time, if you are looking for World War III, with or without nuclear weapons, though probably with, stop looking at Russia, stop looking in the Middle East, look to the South China Sea. And I'm sure this will be an ongoing story. Smoke 'em if you got 'em. Bye, guys.